we're moving into what really is the heart of the book of Hebrews. The key idea that comes out of Hebrews is that Jesus is our great high priest. And so in a sense, the first 4 chapters are leading up to that and are kind of setting the foundation for that. But you'll see that there's more chapters in Hebrews on the theme of Jesus as the high priest than of any other topic in the book. So before we get into it, quick discussion around your tables on this idea of what is a priest. What are some popular ideas in our community of what a priest is? If you use that word, what do people think of? And how much do you think these perceptions align with the biblical idea of priesthood? So hopefully over the coming weeks, we'll develop a thorough biblical understanding of what a priest is, and whether we should call anyone a priest or not is a big question. And I think that's part of the issue for the readers of Hebrews, because remember they were being pressured to go back to Judaism, back to the temple, back to rely on the ministry of the priests in the temple. And the thesis of Hebrews is you have only one priest, one great high priest, and it's Jesus. Anyway, let's pick it up then. So before we read, we'll do a quick recap of where we've come so far in Hebrews 1 to 4. So if you can remember back, it's been a while now, Hebrews 1 to 2, the main idea there is that Jesus is superior to prophets and angels. Not that prophets and angels are bad, but the message brought by the prophets, mediated through angels, was pointing forward to Jesus. It's the shadow, Jesus is the substance. So he's superior because he is truly God, which means he's able to save. So don't look to angels for salvation. Look to Jesus because he is the Son, and because he is truly human, making human beings the object of salvation. By Jesus becoming the true human being, we see that human beings are the ones that he's come to save, not angels. So Jesus came not merely to deliver a message like angels and prophets, but he is the message. And he didn't just come to communicate, but to actually do something to be our high priest. Then we saw in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 that Jesus is superior to Moses and to Joshua, both of whom are types of one who is to come, types of Jesus. So we saw that Moses didn't bring them into the place of rest, bring Israel into the land, the place of rest. And then we saw that Joshua didn't give them rest in the land. So both Moses and Joshua in many ways pointed to Jesus, but they were insufficient in that they could not bring the true rest of God, which is the Sabbath rest. And so Jesus is the only one who gives that Sabbath rest. Rest in the place and rest in action in terms of ceasing from our works. And that Sabbath rest we saw, therefore, because they didn't bring it, Jesus has brought it, and that means it's available still today through faith in Jesus. All right, well, let's read then from Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14, right down to 5, verse 10. Would someone like to read for us?
Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. For every high priest chosen from among men is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifice for his own sins, just as he does for those of the people. And no one takes this honour for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed by him who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." As he says also in another place, "You are a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So we're going to look at a bit of background first, and this will not only help us to begin to understand this passage, but as you can see, this is background for understanding chapters 5 to 10, this whole big section on the role of a priest. And it's understanding the tabernacle. You've got the diagram there too on your tables that you can look at. And we're not going to go into detail on this tonight, because later in Hebrews it will talk about more detail of the tabernacle. But the first reference that may not be directly obvious to us to the tabernacle is in our passage. So you've got obviously the three parts of the tabernacle: the outer courtyard, the holy place, and then the most holy place. Now the tabernacle was designed to be an echo of Eden. So Eden, a walled garden, was actually the very first tabernacle or temple in creation, and Adam and Eve were created to be priests in that temple. So that the terminology used of them in Genesis, the early chapters of Genesis, is priestly kind of language related to the tabernacle. And if you went into the tabernacle, you would see the decorations on the walls of the tabernacle again were echoing Eden. So there would be pomegranates and palm trees and cherubim. Remember the two cherubim at the entrance to the Garden of Eden to prevent the man and the woman coming back in. So it was like walking into the Garden of Eden. Eden was the place where human beings communed with the Lord. And the idea it was like a bridge between earth and heaven, where humanity who live on earth could commune with God who dwells in the heavens. And that was a modern word might be a portal, a link between the two. And that point of connection was right in the middle of the whole complex in the most holy place. So in the most holy place, we see the Ark of the Covenant with the objects inside, which are mentioned a bit later in Hebrews. On top of the Ark of the Covenant is the mercy seat with the cherubim on top of the mercy seat with their wings covering the top, and that is God's throne. So you know the images in the book of Ezekiel where he sees this big platform and there's the four living creatures holding the platform, and on the platform is the throne with God seated on the throne. That's just kind of a large animated version of the mercy seat in the most holy place. So that is the heart of God's presence there in the most holy place. In the holy place, a number of objects, but we're just going to look tonight at this altar of incense. So the priests would bring coals from the altar of sacrifice onto the altar of incense. Then they would put the incense on the coals, and the smoke would fill the holy place. And it was symbolic of the prayers of the people rising up into heaven, being heard by God. And you'll see by the colour coding that the altar of incense technically was part of the most holy place, but it was positioned outside the curtain as a way of indicating the way that we access God, kind of still from a distance, is through prayer. Even if we are separated from God, we can still pray, and God promises to hear the prayers of his people. So in order to, if you enter into the holy places, if they're the link between earth and heaven, then effectively you are passing through the heavens. See, and that's the terminology that he uses in verse 14. We have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens. So it's not a reference to Jesus coming from heaven to earth as such, but that he is a priest who has actually stepped into heaven, into the heavenly places, into the presence of God on our behalf. But to approach and enter the holy place, any human being must first come to the altar. So it's set out this way as to signify how you must come into God's presence. First, you must come to the altar of sacrifice, where there must be atonement made for your sin, because no sinner can stand before a holy God and live. Then the next thing you come to before you go into the holy places is the bronze sea. That's where the priests would wash themselves when they were about their duties. So you would have to be washed clean, cleansed of all your impurities, your uncleanness, because no unclean thing can come into the holy place. Then you come into the holy place, and the third thing you've got to come to is the altar of incense. And you have to come with supplication. I guess like the image there is of a subject coming into the throne room of the king. They have to get permission. May I come before your presence? So in the sense that prayer is supplication, asking to come into God's holy presence. And only then can you then approach the throne of grace, the throne of God. So keep that image in mind. A sinful human being, including the priests, so even the high priest on the Day of Atonement, there need to be a sacrifice for his sins. You have to be washed clean. You have to come in. He'd put incense on the altar, and only then could he proceed through the curtain into the most holy place. So we come now to our passage where we'll see our third type. So we've seen Moses, we've seen Joshua, pointing forward to Jesus. Now we'll see how Aaron, as the high priest, and the Levitical priesthood itself is a type pointing us to Jesus. So how is Aaron how does he point to Jesus by similarity? In what ways is he similar? Well, we're told, verse 14, that he is a high priest. And the high priest there were other priests, obviously, but the high priest was a chief role that was distinct from all the other priests, in that it was only the high priest who could actually go right into the most holy place, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement. So the high priest was the one who passed through the heavens into the presence of God. It was such a significant role and such a onerous role, because if you're going into the presence of God, there's a chance you might drop dead. And so you may have heard the custom they had was they tied a rope to the high priest's ankle when he went in behind the curtain. In case he dropped dead, they wouldn't have to go in and get him. They could just pull him out with the rope. But also the role of the high priest was chosen on a yearly basis and by lot. So no one could say, I'd like to be the high priest this year. No, it was chosen by lot, and only once a year. And most priests then would probably only ever be the high priest once to reduce that risk. So Jesus, we're told that Jesus is not just a priest, he is a high priest. In fact, we're told he is a great high priest. He's so greater even than the high priest Aaron. Secondly, we're told that he's able to sympathise with us in our weakness, verse 15, which means he is a human being just like us. So see how he's always contrasting, well, not contrasting, but holding together the two natures of Christ as priest, as mediator. There's the divine aspect and there's the human aspect. So he's the great high priest who's passed through the heavens. He's also the priest who has shared, who sympathises in our human weaknesses. In that, he has been tempted in every respect. So that is the specific human weakness that in which he has shared and which he sympathises. Jesus' temptation in the wilderness after his baptism mirrored the temptation that took place in Eden. And obviously, the one that took place in Eden failed, whereas Jesus succeeded. Back in Eden, the place of paradise, the place of rest, Adam was placed there in order to be in communion with God, to be a priest to the rest of creation. When temptation came, he gave in and he failed. And as a result, he was cast out of paradise, out of rest, out into the wilderness. A creation that has now come under a curse, and there's thistles and thorns, and the ground is hard, and he has to work with the sweat of his brow. And so he's cast out of paradise and rest into a place of restlessness, and all who are in Adam are in that place now of wilderness and restlessness. What Jesus does is he comes and he reverses that. So Jesus comes and he's baptized, he goes out into a place of wilderness to symbolize that he's identifying with the plight of humanity. And in that place, temptation comes from the devil, and he resists that temptation. And if you look at it in detail, you can see how the three things that the devil tempted him with at that time match the threefold temptation in the garden. Eve looked at the tree and saw that it was good to eat, it was pleasing to the eye, and it was good for gaining wisdom. And those three things corresponded to the three types of temptation that Jesus faced in the wilderness. Because he resisted temptation, he's welcomed in on our behalf back into paradise, into rest. And so all who are in Christ are brought back into what we've just been seeing, the rest of God, the Sabbath rest through Christ, back into that. So he sympathizes with us in our weakness. The third thing that we see, and this is really the thing that the writer wants to emphasize, is that he is appointed by God. And we see that in verse 4. No one takes this honour for himself, but only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So he's drawing a very clear type and shadow there. Just as Aaron was called by God, so Jesus was called by God. Aaron was chosen alongside Moses to lead Israel. He didn't actually get any say in it. God actually said to Moses, go and get Adam and make him the high priest. Sorry, go and get Aaron and make him the high priest. He doesn't say, Aaron, would you like to be the high priest? No, he's just assigned to that role. At the Sinai covenant, when God is giving his law to Moses and he's giving all the instructions for how the worship is to take place, the first thing he gives is instructions for the building of the tabernacle. And then, so there's a tabernacle. The tabernacle needs a priest to serve in it. And so Aaron is taken and he's appointed to be the priest. So what comes first actually is the place where God is to be worshipped, and then the priest is chosen by God to fulfill that role. The other thing that we see about the Aaronic priesthood is it's hereditary, which means none of the priests had any choice about being a priest. You're born a priest. And that's, it's maybe doesn't quite fit our thinking, because we think if someone is born into a role, like a king, then, well, that gives them great privilege, doesn't it? You know, if only I could have been born the firstborn son of Elizabeth and Philip, then I'd be King of England, you know. But it's the point of hereditary succession is that person has no choice. They're in the role whether they like it or not, and they have to then step up to the responsibility. So it's not a role that someone can take upon themselves or choose to take. If you're not born into it, if you're not appointed by God from the womb to be in that role, then you can't have the role. So there are the key similarities that are brought out here in how Aaron points us forward to Jesus. But we know a type also has an inbuilt limitation in some way that forces us to look beyond that person to the one who is to come to fulfill it. What is it in this passage that was a limitation of Aaron that requires us to look for another high priest? Yes. So Aaron was a sinner, and he needed to offer a sacrifice for his own sins. We see it there in verse 3. Because of this, he is obligated to offer sacrifice for his own sins, just as he does for those of the people. So that was a key function of the priest, to be a representative and a substitute. So he would go into that tabernacle, figuratively speaking, bearing the sins of the people and sacrificing an animal on the altar on behalf of the people. So sins that weren't his own. This is the sins of all the people, the things that the people have committed. He's got to take that in, and it's got to be burnt up in the wrath of God's fire on the altar to bring forgiveness for the people. But the thing is, that role cannot be satisfactorily done by a priest who himself is sinful. The priest needs to be without sin in order to be able to have the capacity to bear all of the sins of the people. And we'll see later in Hebrews, because of that, it's got to be done again and again and again, because that sacrifice itself, not just in the sacrifice, but the person who's offering the sacrifice, because they're sinful, it's not sufficient to deal with the sins of the people. So it points us in its limitation to Jesus. So we're told in verse 15 of chapter 4, he sympathizes with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So that's how Jesus is able to accomplish what Aaron wasn't. Okay, now as the writer is often doing, he's making his statement, and then he shows us from the scriptures how this is actually not just his idea, it's an idea that's come from the scriptures themselves. And he quotes two key texts, and these are actually texts that he's already referred to. He referred to them back in chapter 1. The first one is Psalm 2. I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." That's the part he quotes there. "Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." So Psalm 2 is about the appointment of God's king. And see that appointment kind of language. The Lord said to me. I didn't say to the Lord, I want to be king. No, the Lord said to me, "You're my son. I have begotten you. You shall." So the Lord is telling his king what the king is to do. So it's God's appointment. The second reference, Psalm 110. The two most quoted Psalms in the New Testament, Psalm 2, Psalm 110, the two Psalms that are most often applied directly to Jesus himself. And that speaks of this priestly role. In Psalm 110, it's both a king, but it's a king who is a priest. So the Lord says to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool." That was the line he quoted back in chapter 1. And here the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. "You are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." So this Lord, David's Lord, to whom the Lord has said, "Sit at my right hand," appointment, calling, the Lord has actually sworn an oath to say, "You are a priest." So a king and a priest by God's appointment. So how then do we see this priestly role of Jesus working itself out? How do we see Jesus' sinless identification with our weakness in his earthly ministry? Verses 7 to 10. Well, the first thing we're told, in the days of his flesh, he offered up prayers. So that's why we looked specifically at this altar of incense in the temple. As the priest, on our behalf, he offers up prayers. We're told prayers and supplications in verse 7. Prayer is a distinctly creaturely thing. It's the expression of a creature who is dependent upon God for life and breath and everything. It's the way that we as creatures communicate with a God who is invisible to our eyes and not fully comprehensible to our minds. The way that we express our connection, our relationship with him is through prayer. Now, Jesus, as the eternal Son, didn't need to pray because he saw the Father face to face. There wasn't that sense of I'm communicating to someone whom I can't see, whom I can't fully comprehend, but I just, as a creature, have to trust in him. But he takes on this creaturely limitation by becoming a human being. So Jesus' prayers are, in a sense, on our behalf. Every time he prays to the Father, he doesn't need to pray, does he? He could, as the eternal Son, have that direct line of communication. But he does that as a human being. But we're told also his prayers and supplications were with cries and tears to him able to save him from death. So that's the human weakness and limitation. And I think he's referring specifically here to the time of Jesus' suffering that began in Gethsemane. Remember, first thing he did when he got to the Gethsemane, said, "You sit here and wait, watch and pray," and he goes away and he's praying with cries, with tears, saying, "Father, if possible, take this cup of suffering from me." So his suffering because of sin, but it's not his own sin. So suffering caused by the actions of sinful people towards him, which he's about to face, evil men torturing him, crucifying him, killing him, but also caused by the penalty for sin administered by God. So when he's there in the garden, anticipating what's about to happen, it's that twofold. What evil men are going to do to me, but also I'm about to bear the weight of humanity's sin, and I'm going to come under the wrath of the Father himself. Willingly, I've chosen to do this. So that's his cries and tears to the one who can save him from death. Now, the question is, was his prayer in Gethsemane answered? "Father, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering from me." I think this verse 7 is actually telling us it was answered, but just not immediately. He was heard because of his reverence. We'll get to how it's answered in a moment, but what's this phrase saying? God hears his prayers because of his reverence. That word for hearing means intentional hearing. It's not just I heard a sound, but I'm actually paying attention. I'm listening to the prayer is the sense that's there. And we know from other scriptures that only those in a right relationship with God can expect their prayers to be heard in this way. Obviously, God hears everything. If an atheist just tries to send up a prayer to God, well, God hears that because he hears everything, doesn't he? So it's not a reference to God's, the word is omniaudience, his ability to hear everything, not just see everything, but hear everything. It is his intention to act upon what he hears and to answer. So Proverbs 15:8 and 29 says, God doesn't listen to the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous. Right? So again, this is Jesus as a human being on our behalf, offering prayers as a human being on our behalf, and because of his reverence, his prayers are being heard. There's no prayer that Jesus prayed that wasn't heard and answered, because everything he prayed was according to God's will. So, Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, nevertheless not as I will, but as you will. That prayer was answered, wasn't it? Not before, but after the cross and the tomb. That prayer was actually answered in the resurrection. God actually took the cup of suffering from Jesus, but only after Jesus had suffered. So it wasn't keeping him from suffering. It was when he had suffered and completed everything he'd done through his suffering, then the cup of suffering was taken and he was raised from the dead. And Jesus' reverence was demonstrated completely then in his obedience, even to death on a cross. That's why the Father heard and answered that prayer and raised him from the dead, because everything Jesus did in his giving himself over, being crucified and dying was a pleasing sacrifice, pleasing to God, because it was in obedience. Right, how else does Jesus identify with our weakness in his earthly ministry? We're told he learnt obedience, verse 8. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So, although he was a son, he was the Son. So again, think Jesus as the eternal Son. Did he need to learn obedience? No, for all eternity, he's always delighted to do the Father's will. When the Father said, "Let there be light," bang, the Son was in action, in work, in partnership with the Holy Spirit, and they brought about light at the Father's command. And Jesus expresses that relationship. I do as the Father has commanded me, so that the world may know that I love the Father. The Son's perfect relationship with his Father, where because he loves the Father, he does all that the Father commanded. Yet he's also one of us, identifying with our limitations and our weaknesses, where we are born as a baby who can't even understand or speak, and a baby grows up and has to learn obedience, learn what it is to live as a human being, learn what it is to hear their parents' commands and to obey them. And we see that, Luke 2:52, Jesus, this is age 12, Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favour with God and man. So that's a statement about his human nature. He grew, he matured, he increased in wisdom, even in favour with God and man, as a human being is designed to do, to mature, to grow up. So how did he learn his obedience? Again, it was through suffering. So Gethsemane, the cross, the tomb, was an essential part of that learning obedience as a human being. And then we're told, and once being made perfect, he became the source of salvation. That word there for perfect is teleo. The word he used when he said it is finished. So it's not, we might think perfect means something is faulty and it needs to be fixed. If morally corrupt, needs to be made pure. No, the word means completed. So he's brought to full maturity, to completeness as a person, as the Son on our behalf. And then in that position, now as the risen Jesus, still in our flesh, he is the one qualified to be the source of salvation to all who obey. So Romans 5:18 says, "Therefore, as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men." What was the one act of righteousness that leads to justification for all men? We as good evangelicals might say, it's the moment that Jesus cried out, "It is finished." That was the act when Jesus died. Well, no, that was actually the culmination of this one act of righteousness, which was actually his entire life, from incarnation to ascension. That is the one act of righteousness. All of his earthly life for 33 years, all that he did, all of his ministry, all of his suffering from Gethsemane onwards, That was the one act that brings justification and life for all people. All right, so 2 implications for us, which he actually gave us at the start of the passage, but I think he states these 2 implications in light of what he's about to say. So that's why, we're used to saying, well, now we've heard all that theology, what's the application? He's done it the other way. He said, here is the application, the fundamental application of what I'm about to say in the coming, not just the coming passage, but in the coming chapters. And, we're seeing this in Hebrews, aren't we, that he's interspersing all of this teaching with these exhortations and encouragements and applications because it's a sermon. So the first implication for us in verse 14 is we're called to hold fast our confession. Since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. So Jesus passing through the heavens as the Son of God is the reason to hold fast our confession. That word for confession is homologia. Homo means same. Logia means word. Logos means word. So when we make a confession, we are agreeing to something. A word. We've heard a word, and we echo that word back in agreement to what's been said. So we confess our faith in statements that are in line with biblical truth. The creeds, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed are all confessions in that sense. But it's not only that we are saying the same word that we've received, but there's a sense of a corporate thing. By confessing our faith, we are united with all who believe the same. So when from time to time we read out the Apostles' or the Nicene Creed in church on Sunday morning, we know that there are millions of Christians all around the world who will be saying those exact words over the next 24 hours. And we are confessing together with them the faith. So in a sense, this is the objective aspect of it. The faith we've received, the gospel truth that we know that's been proclaimed to us. We confess, we believe it. And Jesus passing through the heavens, what Jesus has accomplished is the objective truth then on which we stand. So at the heart of our confession is Jesus Christ and what he has done as our great high priest. So that's the first implication of Jesus being a high priest. We have something solid on which to stand, solid on which to speak, a confession to which we can hold fast. The second implication is that we're called to draw near with confidence. Verse 16, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And that's in light of verse 15, that this high priest is not just Jesus, the Son of God, who's passed through the heavens, but Jesus, the high priest, who has sympathized with our weaknesses and has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. And because we have that kind of high priest, we see that God's throne is a throne of grace, one that can now be approached, because God is a God who gives. He's a gracious God. What do we come to the throne of grace for? We're told we come to receive mercy. So mercy is not getting what we deserve. Mercy speaks of forgiveness. We deserve wrath, but God graciously forgives us on the basis of what Jesus has done. And so we receive mercy, which is really not receiving, in that sense, not receiving judgment. and find grace. And grace is getting what we don't deserve. So we don't deserve to be children of God. We don't deserve to be able to come to his throne with confidence. We don't deserve an inheritance. But by his grace, he gives all of that freely to us, what we don't deserve. And the third thing that we have from the throne is help. It's an interesting word. It's only used twice in the New Testament. The other time it's used is in Acts 12:17. I don't think it's Acts 12:17. I think it's later in Acts. Anyway, but there's a boat in the storm, so it's actually it's 20 something. It's when Paul's on the way to Rome and they're in the ship and there's a storm and the ship is threatening to fall apart, and the sailors run ropes underneath the ship with the idea of trying to hold the ship together to stop it falling apart in the storm. The undergirding is the idea. So it's related to the word that speaks about at the right time. So it's like just when everything is about to completely fall apart, something comes in and rescues the situation. That's the image that's being portrayed there. So we come to the throne of grace. We don't receive the wrath we deserve. We receive all the benefits that we don't deserve. And we have this undergirding in our own weakness and temptation and imperfections and all of that that undergirds us and keeps us secure, keeps us through to our destination. Right, one last thing then is, well, what's Melchizedek got to do with all of this? He's mentioned twice in this passage, in verse 6 in that quotation from Psalm 110. And then in verse 10, he's been designated by God the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now we'll get into Melchizedek in a couple of weeks, but this is the first time he's mentioned. And so just a few thoughts to prepare us for that. We've seen Aaron as a type of Jesus, but what we'll see also is that this typology that's used of Aaron actually applies to the whole priestly office. So the Levitical priesthood is a type itself of another priestly order, which we'll see it was symbolized by Melchizedek and the story there in Genesis 14. So it's not just Aaron in what he does as a priest and his limitations that points us to Jesus, but it is all of everything the priests and Levites did in the tabernacle is a type that points us to Jesus, and that'll come out in the following chapters. And possibly another reason for Melchizedek being mentioned in Hebrews is we saw back in the introduction that there were quite possibly objections to what the Christians were saying about Jesus being a priest, because they say, no, a priest has to be from the tribe of Levi. Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. Okay, he may be from the line of David, but how can he be a priest if he's not a Levite? And that's something that's also brought out in future chapters. That was remember the Essenes said there would actually be two messiahs. There'll be a Davidic kingly messiah and there'll be a Levitical priestly messiah, because they said, well, you can't have one person who's both. How can they be from both tribes?